Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all to a brand new episode of the Boombox Guru. I'm your host, LB, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about my top 5 Iron Maiden albums. And before I begin this video, I want to give a shout out to my buddy, Zake the Metalhead. He actually is the one who inspired me to want to do this video. We were at work on break one day, and we got into the conversation about Iron Maiden. And I remember in that conversation, he told me, say, hey, I think I see another YouTube video coming with this one. And he was right, because it put me on an Iron Maiden kick, and I started thinking, what would be my top 5 Iron Maiden albums? That would actually be a good video to do. So started listening to my Iron Maiden CDs, and I finally got down to my top 5 that are my favorites and what I think are their best albums. And this is just my list. This is just my opinion. You know, to each his own. Everybody else may have different ones, but this is just my top 5. So, you know, if you leave a comment, just understand that it's my top 5, that this isn't like the be all end all of the list. But Iron Maiden's one of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time. They're the biggest heavy metal band in the world. So I had a lot of fun going back, listening to my CDs, listening to these albums. It actually reminded me how good some of these records are, man. So I had a lot of fun doing this, and I hope you guys will enjoy this video. So without further ado, we're going to get into my top 5 Iron Maiden albums. Alright, so number 1 on my list for my top 5 Iron Maiden albums is none other than the first Iron Maiden album, their self-titled debut, released in 1980. Yes, released in 1980. And at this point, this was a slightly different band. Bruce Dickinson was not the vocalist at this time, and Adrian Smith had not joined the band yet either. Paul Di'Anno was a vocalist, and Dennis Stratton, I believe, was the second lead guitarist in the band. And this album is probably the rawest of most of their releases. The production on here is very raw and rough, and I know in later years the band members have shown dissatisfaction with the production, but honestly, at this time when this record came out, I don't think anybody really cared much about how good an album was produced. I think metalheads in general just cared that they were getting that balls to wall hard rock and heavy metal, and that's what this debut album does, man. So many classics on here, you know, such as Prowler, Sanctuary, Running Free, Phantom of the Opera, Transylvania, Strange World, Charlotte the Harlot, the title track Iron Maiden. Most of this whole album is still, most of the songs on this album are still standards in their live set list. So just a great debut album, man. And for me, it kind of has sort of like a punk approach in some spaces. Now, I know Steve Harris has commented plenty of times that there was no punk influence on this record, that they despised everything about punk rock, because of course at this time metalheads and punk rockers did not get along. But I mean, the influence is kind of there. You kind of hear it. Not that they sound like the Ramones or Bad Brains or anything like that, but you can kind of hear like the aesthetic in the sound. And also Paul Di'Anno as a vocalist, he came off very more gruff and more kind of a punk rock approach. And I think he even came from that UK punk rock scene. I think that's what the song Running Free was about. It was about his days as a punk rock skinhead. So it does have some of those influences, even though Steve Harris kind of denies it now. And songs like Remember Tomorrow, which is more mellower, kind of in progressive rock territory. Even Strange World, those songs kind of harken on progressive rock territory, more melodic. And of course, Charlotte the Harlot would be the first song in those series of songs that would appear on later albums as well and sequels. But just a great record overall, man. And a landmark album, a timeless album, one of the premier and most successful albums I think that came out of the new wave of British heavy metal, and one that really helped to push that movement forward, in the early 80s, man. So definitely Iron Maiden had to make my top 5 list. So next on my list is none other than the second album from Iron Maiden, which is Killers, released in 1981. And I really enjoyed this record, man. And I was kind of surprised. I remember one time I was watching some videos of people ranking Iron Maiden albums, talking about Iron Maiden albums. A lot of people seem to don't really like Killers. And I don't understand, man. I think it's a really great album. I thought it was a bit more of an improvement over their debut. You know, the production on here is a bit better. I think the songwriting on here is also more fleshed out. Adrian Smith had joined the band. He replaced Dennis Stratton. So with this album, you're starting to get a little bit closer to that classic lineup, man. But Paul Di'Anno, I think Paul Di'Anno is a vocalist. I think he even stepped it up more as a vocalist on here, because that more kind of punk rock gruff approach that he had on the debut, it's not really here on this record. On here, he actually sounds like a heavy metal vocalist. And I mean, there's a few songs on here where he's even hitting high notes, almost close to what Bruce Dickinson would bring to the band later on. Almost close, man. But I really think that Killers is a solid follow-up to the debut record, man. So many great songs on here. I mean, Wrathchild is a fan favorite amongst Iron Maiden fans, man. Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is a song based on the Edgar Allan Poe, a short story of the same name. Let's see here, Genghis Khan, Innocent Exile, the title track Killers, Purgatory, Twilight Zone. So many great tracks on here. One of my number one favorites on here is not even the most heaviest song on the album. It's actually Prodigal Son. Man, I enjoy that song so much, man. This is like the slow song on here, kind of like what Remember Tomorrow or Strange World was on the debut. But man, Prodigal Son, that is one of the best Iron Maiden songs I have ever heard, man. That mellow, soft acoustic part during the verses, and man, Paul Di'Anno's vocal approach on there, man, especially during the chorus. Man, you guys can tell how much I really like that song. It is just such a wonderful song. But yes, I was really shocked when I was looking at videos, people ranking Iron Maiden albums, and this album was like kind of low on the list, man. But I really think that this was a great record. I think it's probably the best album that they did in the Paul Di'Anno era of Iron Maiden, man. And just an awesome record in my opinion, man. You know, so my opinion is don't listen to the other reviewers. Try to check this album out for yourself and be your own judge, man. But honestly, I think this is one of their best albums, man, and I really enjoy it, man. It's one of my favorites, man. So definitely check out Killers by Iron Maiden, man. Definitely a top 5 album in my book. All right, so next on my list, coming in number 3, is, you know, the best known Iron Maiden album, arguably, and that is Number of the Beast, released in 1982. So let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about Number of the Beast. This one is like a recent addition to my top 5, because Number of the Beast has not always been my favorite Maiden album. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills, those are songs that I have heard like so many times that it's like me and Zay the Metalhead was talking about it the other day, and he brought a good point about how he got burnt out on those songs because he heard them so much. And I agree, you know, you get burnt out on Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills, you know, because I mean, I remember when I used to watch Metal Mayhem on Fridays, they used to play Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills constantly. And I mean, don't get me wrong, rightfully so, those are great songs. But there are just so many other songs on here that I think are better than Run to the Hills and Number of the Beast. I mean, I think the album opener, Invaders, is really good. Children of the Damned, The Prisoner is probably my favorite on this album, man. That heavy riff in the song is just remarkable, man. 22 Acacia Avenue, which is a sequel to Charlotte the Harlot from the debut album. Total Eclipse, Hallowed Be Thy Name. I mean, this is really a solid effort, man. But as I went back listening to this album, preparing for this video, I started to actually like it a lot more than I used to. Even the 2 big singles, The Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills, you know, I started to, you know, really appreciate them more, even though I think that they have been totally played like overkill. Like, honestly, I still feel that way, that they're just overkill when it comes to being played all the time. But I still appreciate it a lot more, and that's how this album ended up being on my top 5 list. But I do think that the next 2 albums that they did are far better than Number of the Beast. I honestly do. That's just my opinion. I think that the next 2 albums were better. But not only the music on here, but, you know, honestly, just the impact and the legacy that Number of the Beast has had makes it a top 5 album. I mean, this, I know a lot of it was surrounded by controversy, but at the end of the day, man, it was an impactful album. A lot of people got introduced to Iron Maiden through that album, Number of the Beast. I've heard a lot of people say that Number of the Beast was their first time hearing about Iron Maiden, because of all the controversy surrounded it, especially over here in the States, man. But, going back and listening to it, I appreciate the album a lot more. So that's why I went ahead and added it to my top 5. So, Number of the Beast and number 3. All right, so coming in at number 4, my next pick, and this is one of my favorite Iron Maiden albums right here, man. I listened to this one a lot. Peace of Mind, released in 1983, man. Man, I like this album, man. This is such a good album right here, man. And by this point, man, the classic lineup is solidified because, of course, Number of the Beast was the first album with Bruce Dickinson as vocalist after replacing Paul Di'Anno. So on this album, Nico McBrain, he replaces Clive Burr on drums. So now the classic lineup that is still intact today, it was solidified with this record, man. But man, Peace of Mind, what a wonderful record, man. I enjoy this record so much, man. I think it was better than Number of the Beast, because even though I appreciate Number of the Beast more now, I kind of feel that after the first maybe 4 or 5 songs, I kind of lose interest in it. But not on Peace of Mind. Peace of Mind is a strong album from start to finish, man. Where Eagles there, Revelation, Flight of Icarus, which was one of the big songs from here, a Die With Your Boots On, a classic right there. The Trooper is one of my, not number 1, but it's one of my top favorite Iron Maiden songs, man. I really dig The Trooper. Let's see, Sun and Steel. Every song on here is all killer, no filler, in my opinion, man. That's how this album is, man. Every song on here, man. So many heavy riffs. Just a great follow-up to Number of the Beast, man. I really think they did their thing with this record. I enjoy every song on this album. There's not a weak moment on this record. I never lose interest. It's one of those albums where as it keeps going, it gets better and better, man. And such a great record, man. They definitely put out a solid follow-up to Number of the Beast. As big as Number of the Beast was, some people might have been questioning, could Iron Maiden come back with something better? And I think they did with this album, Peace of Mind, man. So definitely one of my top 5 Iron Maiden albums right here. One of my favorites right here. All right, so now we're down to the last one on my top 5 Iron Maiden albums, and this is definitely not the least, man. But this album right here, this next album, this is my number 1 favorite Iron Maiden album of all time right here. And I am confident when I say that. Power Slave, released in 1984, man. Man, my goodness, man. This man, I can't tell you, well, I can tell you, but I enjoy this album so much, man. The band was just, Iron Maiden was on a run at this point, man. With Peace of Mind, I thought that album was so great, but you think like, man, can they do better than Peace of Mind? And boom, they come out with Power Slave in '84, man. Man, I dig this album, man. Come on, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Aces High. I mean, anytime I listen to Aces High, bro, when I'm driving in my car, I have to put myself in check, man, because I end up being like a speed demon a little bit, man. It just gets your adrenaline pumping, man. 2 Minutes to Midnight does the same thing, bro. And then Flash of the Blade and The Duelist are 2 of my favorites on the album, man, because those songs sound like they should have been like in the 80s action movie or some 80s fantasy adventure, man. But every time I listen to those songs, man, I'm sitting back imagining like I'm a swordsman in the wilderness fighting enemies and stuff like that, man. They just had that vibe to them, man. But so many great songs on here, man. Back in the Village, the title track Power Slave, Rhyme the Ancient Mariner, which is, I think, was one of the longest Iron Maiden songs up until they released the Book of Souls back in 2015. And I don't quite know the song on that album that ended up kind of beating Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Maybe some of you in the comments can comment and tell me what that song is, man. But man, Power Slave, like I said, man, my number one favorite Iron Maiden album of all time, man. I just always enjoy listening to this record, man. It doesn't get old. Nothing on this album gets old. Even the two big singles, Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight. I enjoy those songs. I never get tired of hearing those songs. They're just that great, man. And I also like the cover art. I think this album, I would say this is my favorite Iron Maiden cover art right here. I like the whole Egyptian theme that they went with on this record. To me, I think it's their best cover art. Some people may disagree, but for me, I think this is their best cover art album. I really like that whole Egyptian thing that they went with on here, man. And this was a huge album. This was a huge album. I think it might have been bigger than Number of the Beast. I could be wrong about that, but I know the World Slavery Tour, that was a big tour back then. I mean, it was a rigorous tour because I believe the band almost broke up because of how long and how draining that tour was. And they had like a whole elaborate stage setup, which was based on the album cover and everything like that. But man, Iron Maiden, Power Slave, man. You can't go wrong with this album, man. That's just how great this record is, man. Anytime I feel like listening to Iron Maiden, this is always my go-to because it's just a remarkable record, man. It's one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time, man. And you know what? I think it has a timeless feel to it as well. Even though it came out in '84, it just feels timeless. It just feels like listening to something brand new every time you put it on, man. It just feels brand new every time you turn it on. So I really enjoyed this record, man. Power Slave by Iron Maiden, man, released in 1984. Alright, so that's it for my top 5 Iron Maiden albums. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think about my list. Hit that comment box. Tell me what your top 5 Iron Maiden albums would be. And if you did like this video, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up and give me a like. It helps with the algorithm. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure you tap that bell so you'll be notified anytime I drop new content. And I want to give a shout out to all my new subscribers, all my old subscribers, everybody that's been taking the time to watch my videos. I really do appreciate it. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out.